Welcome to Why Such a Fuss, an exciting new channel dedicated to help individuals and businesses to learn more about data protection in a way that is easy and engaging. I'm Christina from CVG Solutions, and I am a fully qualified data protection professional. I am passionate about educating, empowering, and enabling businesses to thrive. Remember to like and subscribe to this channel and help us to spread the word. Data protection is there for a reason. It protects you, your family, loved ones, customers, employees from coming to harm through the use of personal data. So make sure you click subscribe. Now, get ready to embark on a journey of growth and knowledge as we dive into the world of data protection. Now, monitoring and tracking in the workplace is becoming more and more popular by the day, and I've done other episodes on the subject as well as free webinars because it is increasing in the workplace, and the catalyst for remote working really has been COVID-19. And since then, many organizations have continued to support remote working, which provides a better work-life balance for the workers. And obviously, it does increase benefits for the organization because obviously, happier employee, higher productivity. So that's great. However, what this has caused is for the employer to feel out of control on what their staff is up to. And so this has resulted in increasing monitoring and tracking tools or activities, and I think these will continue to emerge. So now I've invited Professor Kirstie Ball from the University of St Andrews, as she has carried out a survey on this very topic. Kirstie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Christina.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I think we have reason to celebrate. You're now a fella as well.
A fella. Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences. Yeah, it was announced this week.
Fantastic. Many congratulations. I think it's a great achievement. So it just goes to show your hard work.
I've done a lot of hard work, yeah.
Now, Kirstie, could you tell us a bit more about your survey? Why did you embark on this work? And also, I believe you're continuing to gather input for your study, and as I think is continuously evolving, isn't that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So I'm currently administering a survey to data protection professionals about how they use the new-ish data protection and worker monitoring guidance issued by the Information Commissioner's Office. The survey itself is 5 minutes, and it asks whether the guidance is incorporated into organisational privacy policies. It asks who the guidance is shared within the organisation, whether any training is offered to organisational members, or whether data protection professionals who will be hopefully answering the survey have noticed any changes as a result of the guidance being there. And that could be anything from observing changes in your own understanding of work monitoring and your ability to advise others about it, or actually observing changes in others' knowledge and others' practices around monitoring. So the guidance also talks about how the ICO wants to enhance trust in the workplace, which is a very lofty aim for the guidance. So I asked that question as well. The reason that I am doing this work is, there's several reasons really, probably four. First of all, it's my thing. So whilst this is quite a new piece of work, I've spent my life studying employee monitoring. I was one of the first people to do a PhD on it in the 1990s. Wow. It's something that I care about. I care that when people are at work, they are managed, which includes monitoring fairly, ethically and legally. And love them or hate them, the ICO has actually published the guidance, and it was amazing for me to see it as someone who's been invested in this for a long time. And so I really want to know, what's happening, what's happening with the guidance, what impact it's having. Yeah, that's the first reason. The second one is what you've sort of already referred to in your introduction, the fact that monitoring has expanded in both scale and scope. For years, this topic that I've worked on has been quite niche, and no one's been really that interested in it. But now it's something that everyone should care about because it's starting to affect us all, as you've pointed out. And it used to be that only a few industries had electronic monitoring, so contact centres, logistics and gambling. But thanks to a number of things, like we're all starting to be affected. Now, you mentioned the pandemic, and that's certainly one of the catalysts for the expansion in employee monitoring, especially the use of things like Bossware and apps that kind of attract people as they're on their machines, working on their machines. But also the digitization of work is something that's really expanded in the last 10 years, really, probably a 10-year trend. And that means that, the people management functions in the workplace are also digitized. So recruitment, training and development, reward and recognition, performance management. So monitoring capacity is really built into a lot of the systems and functions now. So that's the kind of second reason. The third reason is that I actually had some involvement in the production of the guidance as someone who contributed the consultation.
Okay.
So at the end of the pandemic, the European Commission funded their Joint Research Council, which is their research arm, to do a big European-wide survey on the extent of monitoring. And I provided expert advice to the Research Council as they put the research together. The survey, together. And that gave me lots of up-to-date knowledge, which I shared in my submission to the ICO's consultation on the work monitoring guidance. And also the work I've been doing now with the survey, I've also been doing bits and bobs of interviews as well with willing data protection professionals who I happen to have met through my kind of work in and around this topic. Is that I've found a few things that I'm interested in and I want to design a follow-up study. So I'm working on a funding application for that at the moment. So that's the reason why I'm doing it. So I am still gathering responses. I only have 8 interviews. So if you've got an interesting story or any of the listeners have an interesting story about monitoring, then please do get in contact with me on my email address, which I believe you're going to share. But also I'm gathering survey evidence. And at the moment, I do need a few more responses. So I believe you're going to share that link as well. So that's where we are with it.
Yeah, that's right. So in the description below, you can find the link to the survey and also Kirstie's contact details should you wish to engage with her and help her with her continuous studies on the subject. So I'm curious in terms of what has the survey revealed so far, and did you see any unexpected results?
Okay, so I probably do need a few more responses before I can say anything with any degree of certainty. But what I've noticed, both in the survey and in the interviews I've conducted, is that the guidance does seem to be improving people's capacity, that people being data protection professionals, capacity to advise about monitoring. And when I was doing the interviews, I had some, very helpful interviewees, and if you're listening, thank you very much, you know who you are. But I had some examples of really responsible and thoughtful practice regarding monitoring. So what the interviews revealed was that the guidance had increased capacity to advise on the lawful basis of monitoring. And we found that in different organisations, it was being used in different ways. So it was used, it was incorporated into a product design process. In another, it was incorporated into privacy policies. In another, it was helping to inform social partners, such as trade unions, about the lawful basis of monitoring. And the reason this made a difference was because the guidance itself was much more precise. So there was guidance before, but this is much more tailored. It's providing a better reference point for people, and also, that enables the concrete advice to be given. So wider stakeholders are constantly asking data protection professionals what they can and cannot do. They can be specific in their response. Then means there's positive knock-on effects for people like line managers and HR managers who can be more transparent to employees, if they have that ethos driving them, obviously. And then organisations can be more upfront about what they're doing and not doing monitoring wise. But the thing that's really fascinating about these findings is that people kept telling me that they wished more line managers and more HR managers thought to ask the question about monitoring. It's something that is still probably quite in the background. Perhaps people don't necessarily appreciate the consequences of doing it in an irresponsible or in an intrusive way. And I'd really like to explore that next. I'd like to explore what is it that triggers people to kind of ask the question, what gives them the kind of the ick factor, and go into that in a little bit more detail.
Yes, no, that's you're right. I agree in terms of support the outcome or some of what the survey has revealed in terms of the employer doesn't necessarily engage with the employees when for these kind of things, which is, I think, is what was missing. And again, it goes to in line with what you were saying earlier about transparency. But in your opinion, given that obviously you've been working with this subject for quite some time, do you think that employers are justified in monitoring and tracking their employees?
So that's an age-old question. And what you need to remember in the employment sphere is that oversight of work by any means is part of the employment relationship, because the oversight of the work process or the labour process brings that employment contract to life.
Yeah.
And there are legitimate reasons for monitoring employees. First of all, we need to monitor resource use because resources are scarce. We don't want to be wasteful. We have to monitor our cost base, for example, or an employer would say that. The second reason is that we need to monitor because we need to ensure that systems are being used in a way which is compliant. You know, we don't want to be kind of finding liabilities there for whatever regulations we're, working in line with as an employer. And the third reason is that we, as employers, also would need to protect their corporate confidentiality because they don't want, employees taking client lists and selling them and all that kind of thing. So those are, what you'd call legitimate business reasons or business necessity. So it's not that whether we should be monitoring that's the question, it's how we should be monitoring. So it's how it's done rather than whether it's done. And for me, it's, it needs to be ethical, it needs to be legal in terms of the way data are collected, used and analysed. And we start to find problems with monitoring in the workplace when it starts to feel intrusive for employees, when it starts to feel excessive, so the purpose is exceeded, or it starts to feel authoritarian, so it's being kind of used in a punitive way, in a way which is like unnecessarily harsh. And that's where the research can kind of come in to kind of tell us exactly what the consequences are.
Yeah. And it's really interesting what you've just said, because I've noticed that with my clients or, in the past, with various other organizations, that intrusive kind of monitoring. I mean, there are, like you said, some kind of monitoring that is required, that is legitimate for the organization. For example, the organization I used to work for before I started my business, we used to monitor the utilization of the resource. So we had to submit our, time sheeting, so to speak, every week, regardless of what role we were doing, including leadership, just so that we could understand whether someone was overloaded versus someone who wasn't overloaded. So we could redistribute the work. It would also, give us insight whether we needed to plan for recruiting, for example. So that, like you say, is legitimate. But then you've got the excessive monitoring and tracking that is actually rather revealing of the culture of the organization. And what I mean by that, so in an organization that has more of a coaching kind of culture, there is a much more, trust and respect developed with the workforce. So that there is that element of trustiness. While instead in an organization that has a culture more of authoritarian or blaming, pointing the finger, that is where this kind of intrusive monitoring tends to be more in place. And these kind of cultures, again, in my experience, they tend to be less mature in their emotional intelligence. And some HR studies have actually, confirmed that. And going back to what you were saying about the ICO guidance on tracking and monitoring, it really highlights the necessity to carry out a DPIA, to be fair and transparent. And before you go down that sort of invasive monitoring tracking, you should really consider, or an organization should really consider other less intrusive options before going down the monitoring route. It's almost like we consider all these options to be part of your DPIA, actually we, what we need to achieve, what we need to do can only be done in this way. So it's almost like, justifying, tell a story, And they've got to really to demonstrate that option is the only option, and pushing this is pushing the accountability principle. And I just really wanted to touch really quickly on an incident where we have an organization like Serco, who is, a large corporation, and they were collecting fingerprints to monitor the locking in and locking out of their employees. And interestingly, they received an enforcement notice from the ICO, from the regulator, to actually cease this activity immediately. And the investigation that the ICO carried out actually revealed that the DPIA was weak. There was a lack of transparency and fairness, and actually it was deemed excessive or disproportionate in relation to the purpose, which is what goes back to what you were saying earlier, Kirstie, that there has to be proportionate. And that they could achieve the same thing by in a different way that would be less invasive, but also would not involve the collecting of special category data, because obviously in this case they were collecting fingerprints, which is biometric and therefore special category. But I've also looked, and I don't know whether you've done as well, Kirstie, but I think it's interesting, this part. I also looked at, from the other side of the coin, in terms of looking at employment laws. And I've looked at ACAS guides. So for those listening, ACAS stands for Advisory, Conciliation and Arbitration Services. And it's a non-departmental public body that provides employment law and advice on employment to employers and employees. And again, very briefly and high level, what that guidance says is that the employer has the responsibility to be honest and respectful to their team members, must never damage or destroy the relationship and the working relationship, and should not monitor teams members unreasonably. So I thought that was quite interesting. And again, from an employment perspective, if the employer breaches this trust and confidence, then the employee might feel justified in treating their contract as having been unlawfully breached, which can then cause them to resign and then lead to a claim of constructive unfair dismissal. So this is quite interesting, Kirstie. I don't know whether it's something that you might want to think, as part of your research. Yeah. And so, again, going back to basically what we have been saying all along is that, employer really needs to think carefully, and they need to, apply the ICO guidance in full before going ahead, because these could breach the trust, but also, could lead to, serious consequences. And recently also the ICO has provided a guidance on tracking and monitoring as part of recruitment process. I don't know if you've seen that one, Kirstie, but they've done a research where they have surveyed and various recruiters and AI tools developers. And they've provided this report that has over 300 recommendations when it comes to monitoring and tracking in the recruitment environment I'm talking about. I'm actually discussing this with the data protection lawyer as my co-host in another channel that we are launching soon called the Privacy Casebook Diary. So if anybody's interested on that, it will be coming out soon. But yeah, so again, this report that the ICO has issued, it might be worth you looking at it, because it will have some not influence, but it might give you some really interesting input into your research.
Well, no, thanks very much, and thanks for the tip. And I think it's worth mentioning, though, in the context of discussing the employment contract, that monitoring people to ensure that their work's done is only half the story when it comes to management. I'm a professor of management.
Yes.
And, you mentioned empathy, you mentioned emotional intelligence, social support, and having a coaching culture and a very human management style often kind of mitigates the stress of monitoring, because we've all seen that gung-ho manager who goes, well, I've got all this monitoring, and if they don't like it, they can leave.
Yes.
No, if they don't like it, what will happen is people's well-being will be damaged, people will be stressed, organizational climate will suffer, and people will sabotage and resist what's going on. And ultimately, if you're thinking, well, I'm going to do my thing, and if people don't like it, I can leave, that's going to cost you money. So it costs about, if you're going to replace kind of a lower paid employee, for example, it costs 15%, 16% of their annual salary to be replaced. A mid-level employee, 20%. So, that's not the answer. What the answer is responsible management practice.
Yes.
And strongly socially responsible management practice around this, which has, it's dynamite. It can result in, as you said, loss of trust, because if you imagine you're machine monitoring someone or monitoring in a very intrusive way, what message are you giving them? Are you honest? Are you doing your job properly? Are you competent? Are you acting in a kind of a self-interested way? And all those things seek to erode trust in the workplace. So
absolutely,
that ACAS are absolutely correct. And and also the data protection, the employment law side does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in the world of managing and organizing.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, again, an authoritative, or dictatorship kind of management style is never going to get the best out of their workers. And again, a coaching style, it's much more supportive. It's it's also engaging, isn't it? It's facilitating. And it's more to do about, encouraging your work, and not, to be transparent, to tell there is a problem, but you're focusing on how to solve it rather than
developmental aspects rather than punitive aspects. And there are times where we do need to set strong boundaries in the workplace. We do need to do our jobs well and do good jobs. But at the same time, we do need to acknowledge that people are people, and perhaps have good days and bad days, and have times when they do need to be listened to and heard. We're not machines.
Yes,
at the end of the
exactly.
day, so let's not treat people like them.
Yes. Kirstie, thank you ever so much for joining me today. Is there anything else you would like to add before we close?
No, I've said plenty of things, but if you're interested in participating in my data protection and work monitoring survey, please do so. And if you would like to tell me a few stories in an interview, then please do get in touch, and Christina has all the details.
Fantastic. And yes, all the details will be in the description below. And if you would like to get in touch with me, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Just search for CVG Solutions, as you can see in the back of my head. Or alternatively, just email me at info@cvgsolutions.co.uk. Thank you, everyone. Bye.